Welcome to my July virtual program about Black Americans and the 4th of July. And it's going to be a discussion about the events of everything about the 4th of July and the history of Black Americans involved with this holiday. Let me share my screen. Okay. I'll show. And off the bat, as you can see in the background, this is a picture of the infamous Boston Massacre. And in the front, you can see Crispus Attucks, or the depiction of Crispus Attucks getting shot by the British. Introduction. Says, as many of you know, the 4th of July is a celebration of the independence of the 13 colonies from the British Empire in 1776. It's a celebration that obviously has been going on ever since then. I do want to note the fact that during this time where the Declaration of Independence sort of gave man his declared man's inalienable rights as humans, to note that this was not extended to the Black Americans who were still enslaved, even by many of the forefathers of this nation. In particular, how Thomas Jefferson actually wrote a condemnation of slavery, but removed it out of fear of losing Southern support during the American Revolution. And I think that's something that people have to understand with the United States of America, that it's not just one nation, it is a United States. We almost forget to note that part, that it is the United States, they were colonies, and it's like a federation of different smaller nations into one. And this is one of the reasons why it was removed. And we also have to note that not everybody initially wanted to break away from Great Britain. Great Britain was the lifeline for many people. They were still seeing them as distant family. And so going all out war against them was not something that many of the colonists wanted to do initially. Over time, we knew that changed. But again, it was a delicate balancing act. And unfortunately, Black Americans were seen as just property during this entire endeavor. More about the 4th of July. There's this famous, very famous speech done by Frederick Douglass, the great Black American author and active abolitionist who was enslaved in Maryland before he escaped, as we know, to the North. In 1852, Frederick Douglass had a chance to speak to the public about the hypocrisy that he essentially called the state of America at that point. It's 1852. People are having 4th of July celebrations, independence, the rights of man, all while enslaving millions of men, women, and children. In 1852, he got to speak at this building here, back here in the North, and he basically denounced America for its hypocrisy, claiming to be a beacon of hope for all people, for all enslaved millions. You can find this speech online. It's fairly long, so I will allow you to look it up yourself, but it's very insightful and very poignant speech made by the great Frederick Douglass. I do want to talk about a little bit about the American Revolution too. So as we know, the British versus the colonies, but it's a little bit more complicated and comprehensive than that. As we know, there were federations or fighting forces of Native Americans who fought on both sides, whatever they saw would pique their interest or was beneficial to them. As we know, the French also got involved. They were a major part of this American Revolution. As we know, they've had at this point, they had a long-standing rivalry with the British. So helping the colonists fight them was something that they definitely wanted to do. The Spaniards had also played a part in the American Revolution, more specifically out west, further past the Mississippi River, but they also joined the side of the Patriots, the colonists, against the British Empire. And there's another group, as we noticed, that you can see from this, who also fought. and that are Black people. They fought on both African Americans. They fought on both sides, as loyalists and as patriots. I will start with patriots, and the most notable patriots that Black patriot, at least, that people know of, and that is Crispus Attucks. So, as I've noticed, Black Americans fought on both sides. The British, they gained a lot of Black American loyalists with the promise of freeing them if they had fought for the crown. And there, as you know, there was also Black Americans who also fought for the Patriots. Unfortunately, many of them returned to slavery after the fighting, but nonetheless, many Black Americans did fight on the side of the Patriots. And Crispus Attucks is the most popular or well-known of the Black patriots. And here's an illustration of him. I got this on PGCMLS's online resources. So if you want a lot of information or images, you can go on our platform to see many, many great images that you can use for your own reports or projects, anything of that nature, or if you're just curious. And this other picture in the background, that's actually me last October, where I went to Boston. And actually here, it's a lot of people there, so I couldn't get a good crisp picture of the entire monument here on the floor, but this is where the massacre actually took place, and I was there in Boston. A little bit more about Crispus Attucks. He was a former slave. He was born in a time period where there was a decent amount of slavery in the North and even in New England. There was actually an ad put out in the paper about capturing him after he escaped. But he never got caught. He escaped slavery. He worked on ships, and he just became a regular citizen of Boston. Not much is known about his life, other than many historians believe that he is part African American, part Native American. And during one of the protests, because this is at the height of the actual animosity that was building between the colonists and the British for some time, certain taxes that were levied on the colonists that they did not like. They didn't feel like they had got the proper representation in the British Parliament. The king, in turn, sent troops to Boston, where a lot of the tension was growing and really prominent, to actually kind of thwart and suppress any of those bad feelings or rebel feelings. And in one particular incident, many British soldiers showed up, and many of the actual locals in Boston started showing up and heckling them, throwing snowballs at them, clamshells, and no one knows specifically what happened, what really sparked the shooting. We do know that Crispus Attucks was there and protesting with the colonists. We don't know exactly what happened that actually led to the shots. What if it was a singular event that they really feel threatened? That's been up to debate for centuries now. But the colonists were fired upon, and Crispus Attucks was mortally wounded in that. And he actually was seen as a patriot or a symbol of independence. Famed patriot Samuel Adams noted that Attucks was a symbol for independence. But again, that's just a little bit about Crispus Attucks and how Black Americans were a part of one of the most important events in this country's history, as we know. I want to talk about other Black American patriots who actually joined arms. He was not the only one. There was many Black Americans who actually took on a more official role in fighting for the colonies and for the patriots, for the rebels, as they would call them, against the British crown. A man by the name of Samuel Poor, who was also born in slavery in Massachusetts. He actually bought his freedom for $27, and he enlisted in the Massachusetts militia in 1775 and distinguished himself in battle during the Battle of Bunker Hill. As we know, the Battle of Bunker Hill was actually a battle won by the British, but they took heavy casualties, and it made the world put the world on notice that this was going to not just some skirmish between the colonies and this mighty British Empire. This was war. This was a war for independence. And again, Samuel Poor, who's at the Battle of Bunker Hill, his fighting abilities were noted by 13 regiment commanders. And even though it showed the the astonishing amount of efforts to Black Americans that they could fight alongside white men as well. They weren't just property or not reliable in battle. They can actually go out and fight. Peter Salem, another Black man who actually fought for the Massachusetts militia, he was also at Bunker Hill, and he even killed a Major General John Pitcairn at Bunker Hill. I believe he shot him in the head, and it again showed a lot of the Black Americans had the fighting ability that was necessary. But something a little bit more controversial ended up happening after this is that George Washington disallowed slaves from fighting for the Continental Army. But awesome enough as it is, Peter Salem, his owners actually freed him so he can actually continue to fight for the cause. And this was something that showed, even despite the tremendous odds that Black Americans were going to fight. And James Armistead, excuse me. He was also a man who was enslaved, and he was allowed to enlist with the Patriots under famed General Lafayette. He became a spy who gained the trust of the British generals like Cornwallis, probably the most popular general, and even famed trader Benedict Arnold. Armistead was a double spy, played both sides. The British side believed that he was spying on behalf of them when he was actually spying on behalf of the Patriot cause, and his intel helped Americans win the turning point battle of the Revolution, which is the Battle of Yorktown. Again, so many Black Americans fought on the Patriot side and showed their worth when push came to shove, essentially. And I didn't mention too much about Phyllis Wheatley. She was a first Black woman to be noted as an author in America. She was a poet. And I do think it's just important to at least note that her writings were published during this time period as well. So Black Americans on different aspects of life become letting their voices be heard one way or another. And I do want to get to the Black loyalist side. So again, as I noted, George Washington decided to reverse the rulings and not allow slaves to fight on the behalf of the Continental Army. British obviously saw this as an opportunity to gain some favor on their side, so they offered freedom to any Black Americans who fought on behalf of the King, King George III. And many of them did sign up. As many as 20,000 showed up and fought for the British. But after this event, which was a proclamation by Lord Dunmore, Dunmore's proclamation, where he stated that the Black Americans could be freed after fighting for the crown. So it is an actual proclamation, an actual strategy done by the British government. And this actually led to George Washington possibly reversing his decision. So again, just playing sides, playing with the livelihoods of peoples in the quest for war and fame and glory and victory. I also wanted to note another thing about the Patriot side that many people may not know is that the famed orator Patrick Henry, the man who famously coined the phrase "Give me liberty or give me death," had slaves who actually escaped from his plantations and joined the royals. So it's again showing that duality and hypocrisy of the nation. And if you want to know what happened to the Black loyalists after they eventually joined the battle, and after the Continental Army did win with the help of the British and the Spanish, with the help from the British and the Spanish, many of them actually had to leave. This when you join the other side and they lose, as you noted, many of the newly independent American leaders saw them as as traders. So many of them had to leave and go to British controlled territories in the West Indies and some to Nova Scotia in 1783. So again, it's showing how the War for Independence sort of impacted Black Americans on both sides. Some were on the continental side, some were freed after slavery, some were granted their freedom. Many did go back into slavery afterwards. And on the British side, many were returned to slavery, but then others did escape to the British controlled territories to avoid being sold back into the nation's, into the slavery in this nation. And that was just a little bit about the background of the war, a little bit more information there. I do want to get into more about the history of the celebration of 4th of July in Black Americans. So Black Americans, obviously, as many people in this nation, have been celebrating as long as anybody else. But in particular, in the 19th century, Black Americans chose to celebrate on 4th of July on July 5th to avoid confrontations with white Americans. This is during a time where there was a large influx of white immigrants from Southern and from all over Europe. And there weren't any, and there was a lot of tension, especially for jobs, low paying jobs. So there was tension between the immigrants, so the white immigrants and Black Americans in many cities, or just white people in general. So any sort of public event that was held, Black Americans tended to do them either in their own areas, obviously, or they would do them on different days just to avoid large groups coming together and having conflict. And I do want to note that in the difference between the North and the South. So in New York, by the 1820s, slavery had pretty much been eliminated. So Black Americans had been celebrating 4th of July from that point on forward. And it is an incredible thing to note. Let's go forward. And as we know, it did take, and that was just New York State. So let's go to this source. The actual emancipation of Black enslaved Black Americans took more time to be implemented in northern states than we do think. States did start the process of eliminating it as the North became more of an industrial region, and the use of just manual physical labor just wasn't efficient enough anymore. And with the brutal climate and the cold, crops, it just wasn't profitable and it wasn't worth the time. So many just started to naturally move towards more of an industrial mindset. And as with the Industrial Revolution that happened in England and Germany during those early periods, it was started to be phased out, but it did take a bit longer. And I do want to take a look at one source about this particular event. And there's this article here that gives you a little bit more background about how it took states a bit longer to actually get rid of slavery. For example, Connecticut, which is also New England, still had a very small number of African Americans that were still enslaved in 1840. So that'll tell you that, again, it did take a little bit longer than what one might think. Okay. So back to the slideshow. And as we all know, there was a Civil War. The South did not do it until the Civil War occurred, and Lincoln went ahead and did the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Union won, which eventually would lead to the end of slavery. And with the 4th of July, I think it's also important to note Juneteenth. So Juneteenth did begin in Texas in 1865. It was celebrated by Black Americans every June 19th. Since then, it originated in Galveston, Texas, after Major General Gordon Granger notified the Black Americans in that town that they were finally free. This was a few years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and they were also noted as maybe one of the last towns to actually be notified. The Black Americans were the last to be notified of freedom, and it's been celebrated ever since, because it's like that last moment where we were all free. And it became popular, especially with the former slaves in the 1870s, 1880s, in Texas in particular, to celebrate it. By the 1900s, popularity had waned, but there was a mini revival amongst Black Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. This was a time where Black pride and Black power was getting a lot more popularity, and people were sort of holding their roots to a higher regard than they already had before, and it gained a new life from then. And again, the holiday actually even gave a newer height of popularity and national attention in 2020, when it became a officially recognized federal holiday. And as we can see here, this is the moment where President Biden actually signed it into law to be a federal holiday. This is some of the past celebrations of Juneteenth. So I did want to talk about Juneteenth a little bit too, the 4th of July, since we were talking about Black Americans. This is a very important holiday to note. In conclusion, it was important to note the 4th of July speech, some notice about the Black Patriots who fought, a little bit more about Black loyalists and the fact they did exist. Also wanted to note the point about the celebration of the 4th of July, and then a little bit about the 4th of July speech, the 4th of July and then Juneteenth. I also wanted to get into the bit more into the actual 4th of July speech by Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass. And here, this is a speech I think that's so important because it's during this time period, there was a strong abolitionist movement in the North, but there wasn't really a time where but most of the abolitionists were white, so they had controlled the narrative. They were the ones that were speaking a lot of at these speeches and condemning slavery, but to actually have somebody who actually was born into slavery and actually lived through the brutality, gave a deep and long speech about the hypocrisy of it, it just gives it more reverence. So I did want to show people at least where you could find the speech and you could read it yourself. It's quite a long speech, but I do think it's important to possibly note and take credence to. Another thing I do want to note is the pictures and the images I got, and a lot of the information I got, most of it came directly on our platform at PGCMLS info. And this is where you can get so much information about American history, world history, everything. So you just go to pgcmls.info, click on online library, go to online resources. And then you can essentially sort by category. So if you don't know exactly where you want to start, this is where you can get a lot of information. And the images I got from, I'm going to do a keyword search for image quest from Britannica. You can get a lot of free images to use for your projects. History, again, ABC CELO, this is where you can get a lot of combination history information, where it has African American history, American Indian, Latino, all the databases in one. And from here, you can search many things. And this is where I found a lot of information. Oops, spelled that wrong, excuse me. Crispus Attucks. And I'm just going to look up Crispus Attucks just to give an example of where you can get fantastic information about him. Okay. And that is it for my virtual program. Thank you for joining me. I do think it's important to note the contributions of Black Americans in relation to the 4th of July and the inception of this nation. So thank you for joining me, and have a nice day.